So for those of you that are seasoned Lakeland people, I feel like I should be talking about College Credit Plus or something right now. So it's very unusual to be here in this capacity. But thank you for the opportunity to talk to everybody today. Yeah, I'm a few minutes late and I apologize, but the reason I was late, I was helping do the strategic plan for Project Hope, which is our only homeless shelter here in Lake County. And so I will share with you how this presentation is going to go. So there's a book called Switch by Dan and Chip Heath, and they talk about changing people's behaviors, and they talk about the analogy that they use is a rider and an elephant. And you can have a rider on top of the elephant, and he can be smacking that elephant until the elephant wants to go. It's not going to move. And our brain sort of works that way. The logical part of our brain is the rider, and the elephant is our emotional part. So the first part of this presentation is going to be the rider. It's going to be the facts, it's going to be some statistics. And then I'm going to end the presentation sharing some stories with you and things that I think are important for us to understand while we're working with people that come from poverty and developing empathy. This work is personally important to me, and the reason for that, and I share that when I do these presentations, is that when I was a junior in high school, my family was homeless. I grew up in poverty. It's my work here at Lakeland that started me on this path. At one time here at Lakeland, my title was Director of Student Success. And when I was doing some research in the President's office to look at what was helping students be successful, at that time it was when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was releasing their findings. There was Achieving the Dream, there was the Lumina Foundation. And what we saw from that research was that people that weren't likely to succeed, weren't likely to get to their degree, were people that were coming from underprivileged situations, which was me. There were people that were starting in developmental education, which was me. They were persons that were first generation college, that was me, and they were minority. I'm proud to say that I graduated my 4-year degree on time, earned my master's degree, and I'll share a little bit about that later. But it wasn't because of a program, and it wasn't because of a certain approach. And so for me, in talking today, I want everybody to understand, like, what is the challenge specific to here in Lake County. We're a very affluent community, comparatively speaking, but I would make the argument that from my seat at United Way, we have to demand that there's a bare minimum standard for the people that live in our community, which means we have to guarantee that everybody has a roof over their head. We have to guarantee everyone has access to food. We have to guarantee that everyone has access to health care. And so definitely going to share some resources with you, and it's much simpler than you might think in terms of how to connect people with resources. But what I really want to talk about at the end of this is how every single person in this room has the ability to change somebody's life and help change the trajectory of their life. And it doesn't have to be through sharing your treasure. So no, I'm not going to ask you to give to United Way today. So what is poverty? So I'd like you to, you're all mostly sitting next to people, or if you're by yourself, I want you to sort of quickly scratch down what are the sort of buckets where your money goes, and what do you think the threshold is? Without looking on your phone for the federal definition of poverty, how much do you think it takes to be considered impoverished for a family of 4 or an individual annual income? So at your tables, come up with what you think the dollar amount is. Would you do me a favor? Yes, would you just do a couple of these at each table? Like, divide them up. Yeah. Anybody comfortable sharing what they think the number is? 42,000. Jerry says 42,000. Is that family or 4 individual? Family of 4. Family of 4, 42,000. Family of 4 is 30. 35. And that's the number I'm asking you for poverty level. So the federal government will calculate your ability to earn benefits based on this poverty level. So you are considered at poverty level if you are earning $12,000, close to 13, if you're a single adult, and if you're a family of 4, if you don't even earn $30,000. That's poverty. So while I use the hook of talking about poverty to get you here, I'm really going to talk about people that are struggling. And so at United Way, we use a term that's called ALICE. And ALICE refers to those folks that are access limited, income constrained, and employed. So earning more than the federal poverty level, which isn't very difficult to do, but still having a difficult time making ends meet. So in Lake County, so this is our Lake County data, and this goes back to the census from 2020. So this is the most recent report. So I know in 2024 it seems like it's a little bit outdated, but this is the most recent. The total number of households were about 99,990. 7% of our folks were living at that poverty threshold, which I think everybody in this room can agree is unacceptable. But another 24% are living below. So that means, right, that over a third of the people who live in Lake County aren't being able to meet their most basic needs. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that means in terms of housing and food, and when we think about basic needs. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. So what I would like you to do right now, Tracy passed around some Post-its. If on your Post-its, if you have something to write with, and if you don't, do this as a mental exercise. But I'd like you to jot down a couple of things that you think become more difficult if you're living at poverty level or within this ALICE threshold that don't have to do with basic needs. So what is something that you think might be more difficult for folks navigating day-to-day life that doesn't have to do with whether or not they put food on their table or a roof over their head? Those are basic needs, basic human dignity. But what are some of the other things that become challenging for folks that maybe we don't take into consideration? And so I'll encourage you, as we go through some of this data at the beginning, as you have additional thoughts, keep your list going. So I heard a couple people say transportation. What were some of the other things that you were talking about? Childcare.
Maintaining your physical and mental health.
Maintaining your physical and mental health. So I do a poverty simulation, facilitated poverty simulation, and the Institute here at Lakeland does it as well. But in that poverty simulation, what we do is we invite folks to model what it's like to live in a family situation right at this ALICE threshold, so not at or below poverty. So you're given a scenario, you know, this is how much money I make this month, here's who my family is working full-time or part-time, here's who goes to school, here's how much my utilities are, here's how much my mortgage is, and you live 4 15-minute weeks in poverty. And at the end of it, when we debrief, one of the questions I always ask is, did anybody feel like they didn't tend to their children properly? You know, how many people on the weekends were looking for AAU opportunities in basketball or taking them to dance class or, you know, those types of things. And it's like people that are forced into this situation live in what Ruby Payne, who wrote The Bridges Out of Poverty, talks about as the tyranny of the moment. And so a lot of the folks that are living within this threshold, they are focused on just simply what it is to get through day to day. There's a big difference for someone like me, who is a salary employed somewhere, that when I get a call from school that my child is sick, I don't think twice about going and picking up my son, right? Never occurred to me. I'm gonna go get him and take him home, get him taken care of. You know, if I had the luxury of working from home that day or taking the day off, I have the time. If I'm an hourly employee somewhere and I get that call, me leaving might be the difference between me being able to pay my lights that month. So everything becomes a little bit more complicated. So in Lake County, again, arguably an affluent county in Ohio, we still have only 69% of our folks living above that threshold. So when you look at Lake County overall, our participation rate in the labor force, we're slightly higher than the state of Ohio. Our median household income is above the average. Our ALICE households are slightly below, and our poverty level, 7 compared to 13, again, makes it look like we're doing pretty well. But you're doing pretty well if you're on the right side of those numbers. And so again, I would argue that I think all of us agree everybody deserves the opportunity to live above that level. I think it's also important for us to understand that when we talk about poverty or we talk about the challenges faced with folks that are not making ends meet, that ALICE threshold isn't expressed equally across all demographic groups. So looking at single female-headed homes, 67% of households in Lake County that are led by a single mom live below the ALICE threshold. So for those of us that are faculty in the room, every time you have a single mom in your class, there's a really good chance that not only is she in your class trying to improve her life, but she's struggling at home. When you look at the age group, this is interesting. So across the nation, children suffer from poverty more than any other demographic. Here in Lake County, you can see that for us, it's seniors, and this is really a challenge. So I just came from Project Hope, our only homeless shelter in the community, and their number one challenge right now is providing housing for seniors. Their senior Hope House, which is a facility specifically for homeless seniors, has been full for months. So that group is continuing to grow and is continuing to have those challenges as well. And then again, on racial demographics, our African American friends and neighbors, 46% live below that ALICE threshold, Hispanic is 32%, and white is 25%. So the difference by community, so again, Lake County is a small county. Hi, Karen. Lake County is a small county, and poverty exists across from west to east, but there are certainly parts of our county that are more heavily impacted than others. So all of this data is in the Ohio United for ALICE PDF that is on our website, but certainly after this, if anybody wants any of this information or the sources, I can share that with you. So the challenges are, what's happened in the last few years especially, is that the cost of being able to provide for yourself, the cost of housing, the cost of groceries has continued to climb while people's income has stayed relatively flat. And so even if you look at Lake County year over year, trend-wise, we're holding pretty steady at that 24 for the ALICE threshold, and we're holding pretty steady on the poverty at that 7%. But remember, we're looking back at census data. We're not looking at the data from 22 and 23. So if you talk to our nonprofit executive directors, if you talk to the people that are leading the food pantries and the folks that are at the shelters, this jump we're going to see over the next couple of years. So ALICE, or United Way, talks about, you know, having a livable calculation to be able to figure out, you know, what your livable budget is. And these are the things that they have put in. So remember, I told you right now in Lake County that 24% are living below that threshold, but some of you right now are looking at these numbers and you know these numbers are out of date already. Like our rents in Lake County have jumped significantly. One of the biggest challenges we're facing right now is the number of landlords that were Section 8 landlords who are pulling out and are not providing Section 8 housing anymore because they can get more rent outside of Section 8. They used to be incentivized because if they were Section 8, they knew they would have someone who was going to come pay every single month, didn't want to lose their Section 8 status, and they were going to have that amount of money that was also coming from the federal government. You can now in Lake County, in some areas, rent a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom home for $1,800, $1,900 a month. There's apartments that the rent is $1,300, $1,400 a month. My mortgage is less than that. So when we have folks that are in the homeless shelter, whether it's Project Hope or Forbes House, which is our domestic violence shelter, and they're ready to transition out, part of what's keeping them from being able to transition out is not being able to find affordable housing, even though they have some income. So there's a self-sufficiency calculator that the Ohio Association of Community Action Agencies uses. So our community action agency here in Lake County is Lifeline. So they are federally mandated to try to help break the cycle of poverty. And we'll talk a little bit about the cycle of poverty. But they use this self-sufficiency calculator. And so this is based on the most recent statistics in your county. So for those of you that are faculty and are interested in any of this type of work, this is a great tool to use. So just to give you an example, Does anybody want to use their actual just for fun and games? Otherwise, I'm going to go 2 adults, and I'm going to pretend that I have 1 preschooler at home, 2 school-aged. So I want you to look at this. This is the important number. So if you are to be self-sufficient with 3 school-age children at home, 1 preschool and 2 school-age, the suggestion is that you need to be making $90,506 to be self-sufficient. That's a pretty significant jump from the $26,000 at the poverty level. So this tool, I think, is incredibly helpful. And I heard someone say, like, look at the cost of childcare. In my previous life, so those of you that don't know me, you've already heard that I worked here, and now you know I work at United Way, and now I'm going to share with you, for a couple years I ran funeral homes. So now it makes it sound like I can't keep a job. But when I was at the funeral home, you know, I had a person who was on our administrative team, and she qualified for benefits, and then we went to adjust her pay. And adjusting her pay would have disqualified her for benefits and make it so that she couldn't afford childcare anymore for her son. And we literally, by trying to give her more money, were forcing her to make a decision to stay in or leave her job. So I don't get into a lot of conversations about policy. I'm not a politician, and this isn't what this is about. And so I'm going to bring it back to like what we can do as individuals. But this misconception that it's easy because there's so many benefits and there's so much that people can access isn't necessarily true. There are a lot of resources, and I'm going to share with you some of those resources, but they aren't always easy to navigate, and there's a lot of nuance to what's available to people. Housing is probably our #1 crisis here in Lake County right now. For years, it was food. For years, if you looked at our 211 data, the thing that people were searching for more often than not was looking for where food pantries were and food scarcity. Right now, it's housing. So if you look at us in the country, we are the 37th highest for housing. So again, cost of living here is good. It's all relative, right? I mean, I can make the argument Lake County is an affluent community. It doesn't cost a lot to live here. But this talks to you a little bit about what the fair market rent is for a 2-bedroom apartment is $993. So again, we know those numbers have escalated. So what that means for us here in Lake County, the rental crisis is because the rents are just going up significantly higher than anybody's ability to pay for them. And we're really seeing the impact of this, as I said, on our seniors who are on a fixed income. Right now, 26% of all of Lake County households are rental properties. So that in and of itself presents a challenge. The fair market rent value for a 1-bedroom is $789 a month. So that means someone would have to make $15.77 an hour to be able to afford that. So if you look at the minimum wage and what that equates to, you know, someone would have to be able to work 62 hours in a week to be able to afford that. And then you take into account what a Social Security payment is or disability, it's significantly lower. So in terms of how the situation is getting worse, part of it is also in how properties are purchased. So there was a gentleman who wrote the book Evicted, who then came back and wrote Poverty Made in America. And I went and heard him speak, and he was giving an example of a family out of East Cleveland. And it was a woman who was living in a home that her rent for that home was like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in the east side of Cleveland. And she was paying like $950, $970, something like that a month for the rent of the house. If she were able to buy that house with a 30-year conventional mortgage, the payment would have been less than half. But the fact of the matter is, banks don't make loans on those small amounts as often, and it's not because they default with any more frequency. They actually default less than the big loans. But banks don't typically make those loans because they're so small and there's not enough money to make off of them and off of the interest. So what ends up happening is we create this vacuum, this space for cash buyers to come in and buy the homes. And typically when a cash buyer is coming in to buy the home, they're not buying it to live in it. They're buying it to flip it and sell it, or they're buying it to rent it. And then the rents become much higher. And so while we saw that happen nationally, it's now a challenge here in Lake County. 5 or 6 years ago, to be able to buy a bungalow in Wickliffe, Eastlake, and it'd be $50,000, $60,000 wasn't unheard of. You won't find that again. And so what that's doing is just creating more and more of a downward pressure on our folks that are already struggling. Food insecurity, about 9.8% of the folks who live in Lake County claim to suffer from food insecurity. So if you look at us compared to other counties and look at us across the state of Ohio, that's positive. We're trending downward in food insecurity, so that's a good thing. We at United Way partner with over 30 food banks, food pantries in our county. We have a strong partnership with the Greater Cleveland Food Bank. And I think part of why we do such a good job with food insecurity is that food is one of those things that's it's easy for people to get their heads around. So when we do a Feed Lake County campaign as an example and write letters and ask people to do food drives, people really respond to that. I think it's that emotional connection piece. But again, when you think about people that are struggling to make ends meet, the food security part, being able to get to a pantry. Remember we talked about what are the things that are more challenging? Just transportation as an example. So a couple weeks ago I was at Old South Church in Kirtland. They have a choice pantry. It's really fantastically run, and what it means to be a choice pantry is that you go in as if though you're shopping. So you park your car, you go in, on the shelves it tells you how many items are available to you per shelf. Someone walks through, you fill it. Very dignified. It's a beautiful setup. But as I'm there, there were folks that were really struggling to get out of their car to get into the pantry. So just having to get up and get out of their car was a challenge. So then you think about the people that are homebound that aren't able to make it. So that's why Meals on Wheels is so important out of our Lake County Council on Aging, being able to deliver food to our folks that are homebound. But the other part of it, and I'll talk about this a little bit later too, it's not just whether or not you have the transportation, it's also what time are the pantries open. So we help partner with the Mentor Schools to do their food distribution. And we first started doing that, it's always the third Thursday of the month, and it starts at noon. And we try to do the lunch hour with the hope that people could leave work and come. But we would still get calls the days leading, is there any way that you can do this after hours, or is there any way you can do it before work? Because again, the people that have the most flexibility during the day who are employed aren't the people that need the food. The people that have the least flexibility during the day are the folks that probably need the food. So trying to be able to meet people where they're at so that they have access to everything continues to be a challenge. The reason food insecurity, though, is something that we're concerned about is, as you all know, and you have seen it happen, the cost of food has gone up significantly compared to everything else. So the adjustment in people's pay, the adjustment in benefits, the cost of food just continues to skyrocket. Those 38 food pantries that we partner with, the data that they provide us is it's a little over 2,000 families per month that visit our food pantries here in Lake County, and we're grateful that that exists. One of the things that happened this last year that was a big challenge were the SNAP benefits. So under COVID, the federal government expanded SNAP benefits. So people that were getting benefits to help them with securing food were getting 3 checks a month, and then that went down to 2. So at the time where food was at an all-time high cost, we rolled back the benefit because COVID was over. And so that really put a lot of people into a tight situation. And again, our seniors who are on a fixed income continue to struggle with food insecurity disproportionately. I think that one of the things that is a challenge when it comes to the food insecurity issue as well is it's not just the time and the transportation. I think the other thing that we're recognizing is the challenge for people that have never had to ask for help, asking for help. At the Mentor Schools, the food line, one of the things that struck me, there were two things. The first one was when we first started doing this, when I first joined the team at United Way and was talking to the folks at Mentor, I had someone talk to me about, we were talking about an employee campaign and saying it was difficult to encourage people to participate in the employee campaign if all of the help was going to go to another part of Lake County. Felt like there wasn't as much need in Mentor. So the first day that we did this food drive, our intention was to distribute food from 12 until 2, and we were packing from like 10 until 12. By 11:15, the line was already from the stadium out to Center Street, and we had to call the police to help us with traffic control. 15 minutes after 11, 45 minutes for distribution supposed to start. And that first day, we distributed over 6,000 pounds of fresh produce within 15 minutes. And so, you know, I had said to the gentleman from Mentor who had said to me, hey, I don't think Mentor has this much need. I'm like, hey, take a look down the road, right? But the thing that struck me was the number of people that when they came through, when they said hello to the volunteers that were loading the cars, when they recognized somebody they knew that was volunteering, apologizing or trying to explain why they were in the line. To me, that's unacceptable. No one should have to apologize for needing food. No one should have to explain away why they need help. And so I think that is one of the other things that we don't take into consideration when we think about all of the things that are available to people, that there are other obstacles that occur. So what I will tell you is that everybody here just needs to know 211. Like, I can list off a million different organizations, tell you what they do, how they help people coming from poverty, who's helping with basic needs, who's helping with transportation, who's helping. I can give you all of that. You'll forget most of it, and that's okay. What you need to know is 211. So 211 is the social services 911. It's the one place you can call, it's the online, it's the text. They have every way that you can communicate with them, where you can ask, where is there a food pantry? You can ask, where is there a homeless shelter? Where do I go if there's domestic violence? I need help with rental assistance. I need help. Anything that you need help with, when you call 211, you'll be able to be directed, and there's a navigator there. For those of you that are here as faculty members and are interested in this as a topic, one of the things under 211, so I can go here and I can search for any sort of help, but I think the dashboard, if I can get there, am I just not holding it? There we go. The dashboard will give you a live look at what people have been searching for. And so you can see, in terms of here in Lake County, if you're wanting a quick snapshot on what people are calling 211 and looking for, like I said, year over year, it used to be people were looking for the food pantries. People were looking to see what sort of a help was available to them there. You can see that housing and shelter is now significantly higher than that. People are looking for help with their utilities, low-cost housing, rental assistance, that sort of thing. So if you're ever wanting to sort of see a quick snapshot of where people are searching for help in Lake County, you can go here to 211 to see that. But more importantly, you can go to 211 and you can plug in any one of these search words and see where there's help for you here in Lake County. And what's nice about 211 particularly is that if you call, so if you email and text, you can have your anonymity, and that's very important as well. If you call 211, you can still remain anonymous. However, if you want to be connected with a navigator, so someone who will ask you some additional questions so that they can see what the whole picture is for you, they can connect you with other resources as well. So at the beginning I said, like, hey, what else is hard about coming from poverty? And we brainstormed some of those things. You know, and I always say that it's not just about the money. For us at Leadership Lake County, sorry, that was last week's retreat. For us at United Way, we have these three buckets, which is financial stability, education, healthcare. So every dollar that we take in, that we invest through our community fund, goes into one of these three areas. But I like to say this is a really complicated Venn diagram. If you are suffering from financial instability, the likelihood that if you have small children at home that you're sending them to school not kindergarten ready is higher. If you're financially unstable, the likelihood that you're underinsured or uninsured is higher. If you're financially unstable, the likelihood that you live in an environment where there's toxic stress is more likely as well. So it's hard to sort of parse these things out. So for us at United Way, when people question, why do you fund so many different things? It's because it is so many different things. If we thought that there was just one thing that we put all of the dollars into, we would certainly invest all of our money there, and we would be screaming from the rooftops for everybody to invest all of their money there. But it's certainly more complicated than that. For children living in poverty, so like we said, nationally, this is the largest group. In Lake County, it's our second largest group. Here's all of the things that are associated with kids coming from poverty. And I read this and get a weight on my chest because I know as someone growing up in poverty, I can check these things off for you. Developmental delays, toxic stress, chronic illness, nutritional deficits, lack of educational attainment as they get older, lack of employment as they're adults, higher instances of teenage pregnancy. But the part that is most, to me, upsetting is that last little box there. Only 1% of children who were never poor end up poor as adults, yet 32% of poor children will become poor adults. So the idea of upward mobility, of opportunity, of chance, right? When we hear people say things like they just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and blah, 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 I will explain to you why that's nonsense. But for our adults that are coming from poverty, across their lifespan, folks that are coming from impoverished communities, they are more likely to suffer from mental illness, chronic disease, early mortality, homelessness, incarceration, and domestic violence. And so I can share with you, as someone who grew up in poverty, that a lot of those things on that list were the things that I grew up with. Poverty and educational attainment, and so I think this is particularly important for you folks in this setting, but something that we focus on United Way as well. Kids that are coming from poverty are much less likely to show up in a K-12 district kindergarten ready, and why that's important is because if you show up not kindergarten ready, the likelihood that you catch up ever is non-existent. It's not the kids that show up not kindergarten ready get caught up by 5th grade with a lot of enrichment, or they get caught up by 8th grade. Most kids that show up not kindergarten ready will graduate behind their peers, right? I don't know if I showed up kindergarten ready, but I ended up in developmental English when I was a freshman in college. And so that just ripple effect follows them throughout their entire life. For people that are coming from poverty, even a college degree isn't a guarantee that you're going to get out. And that's what the graph on the left shows us, is that you're more likely to get out of poverty and not be living in the lower quartile if you have a college degree, but it's still not a guarantee. A lot of folks come from poverty, earn their degree, and remain in poverty the rest of their life. So why money isn't enough, right? If that were just it, and there's the TED Talks about just guarantee everybody, a minimum income, and there's all these policy types of things, and I said this is going to be about policy. But it isn't always about money to get people out of the situation. And like I shared the example from at the funeral home, increasing her salary, increasing her hourly wage wasn't actually something that was going to benefit her. It actually made things more difficult. Being poor requires constant problem solving. It is much more difficult to make it work when you're poor than when you don't. So we talked about transportation, childcare, right? How many of you pay your bills online, right? A lot of people do. A lot of people don't. The reason people don't pay their bills online is if you don't have a checking account, if you don't have a credit card, if you have bad credit already. So when I do the poverty simulation, one of the first things people will push back on is like, there's a certain block of minutes that you go to work, and then the rest of the time is like supposed to represent your free time in the weekend. And that's when you're going to pay your utility bills, going to pay your mortgage, going to take care of any of your other, grocery shopping and that sort of thing. And people will say, well, this is ridiculous. I can do all of this online. I do not have to waste all of this time. That's not necessarily true, right? Like if you can pay it online, that's fantastic, but there's still a whole bunch of people that can't. When I did the poverty simulation a few years ago, we were at the McKinley Center on Lost Nation, and it was a snow day. It was terribly, terribly snowy. And the sidewalks hadn't been cleared, and I was driving down Lost Nation, and there was a woman who was pushing a cart who probably had all of her worldly belongings in that cart. And the woman from Lake Tran was part of our simulation. She saw her, and she yelled out to her and said, hey, do you need help getting to the bus stop? Woman says yes. She picks her up, scoops her up, takes her to the bus stop. So when she comes back, I say, you know, I'd like to share that as an example. I said, that's one of those things we don't think about, right? We think about, you know, people that have money keep their heat on, they don't have enough money to have a roof over their head, maybe they're going hungry. I said, but because she doesn't have basic transportation, has to use public transportation, her safety was in jeopardy this morning just by the fact that she had to walk in the middle of Lost Nation to get to the bus stop. And Julia says, well, you can tell the story, but it's actually not a great one. She said, it's sort of sad. And I'm like, why is that? And she said, well, she was going to the food pantry in Paynesville, and it's closed because of the snow, but I just found out. So that woman got up that morning, navigated the snowstorm to hop on a bus to get to the closest food pantry to her, and when she got there, she was going to find out it was closed. It's that sort of constant swimming upstream that wears on people. The decision fatigue, right? You know, we talked about that a lot when I was here at Lakeland under the guise of student success, and talking about like our students that come here that are spinning all of these different plates. You know, by the time you get to the end of the day, the decision fatigue wears you out. The fact that you're constantly having to decide what money's going where, how to prioritize things, and by the time you get to the end, you're just too tired to make good decisions. It's physiologically a thing. It's not just like someone throwing their hands up like, I can't do this, I'm too overwhelmed. Like, you are overwhelmed. The system isn't always easy to navigate, right? So if you go and you live on the western end of the county, there's the Wycliffe Family Resource Center that's available to you. If you're in Perry, there's the Perry Center, which is also in partnership with the Salvation Army, and there's there. And then in the middle of Paynesville, you have the Salvation Army, which is the day shelter. But the Salvation Army is the only day shelter for homeless folks in the entire county. So that's it. So if you're homeless on either end of the county and don't have transportation to get to Project Hope, don't have transportation to get to the Salvation Army, chances are you're not going to get those resources. Not that they're not available, but because they're available doesn't mean that they're readily available all of the time. The other part that we talked about, or I talked about in the line with the food distribution, this idea of dignity, right? For some folks, if it's not an example of generational poverty, if you're a senior who's on a fixed income, who's never had to ask for help before, you are less likely to engage in the system, especially if you're living in isolation. That's why it's so incredibly important that we invest dollars that are in the Lake County, or the Lake County Council on Aging, that tries to break the isolation of our seniors, to get them to come to the senior centers, because they aren't accustomed to asking for help. And then they make tough decisions between paying for food and paying for medicine. And again, we don't think that anyone should ever be forced to do that. And then the other part is just the physiological development. What is involved with growing up in this environment? And so I apologize to those of you that have heard me tell this story before, but it's my story, and I think it's worth sharing for folks. So what we know about families and kids that grow up in poverty is that there is a disproportionate number of families and children in poverty that grow up with what is referred to as just this chronic toxic stress. And so about 30 years ago, there was a pediatrician out of Kaiser who recognized that kids that she was seeing were demonstrating certain illnesses at a higher rate. So as examples, they were more diabetics, there were more cases of asthma, there were more behavior problems. It wasn't just a matter of, maybe they were in an unsafe environment and they were suffering injuries from that, or there was exposure to lead. There were the other things that she felt there had to be a connection between poverty and what was happening with these folks. So she and a group of researchers came together, and what they identified as a way of measuring is what they referred to as the Adverse Childhood Experience Survey. And so the Adverse Childhood Experience Survey tracks 10 questions. So you go from a 0 to a 10. So 10 experiences. So one, for example, is, did you ever go hungry? It's just 1 point or 0 points. So it's not, did you go hungry 5 nights a week, for 3 weeks, for 4 months, for 2 years? Yes or no, did you ever go hungry? Yep, you get a 1. So there's 10 of these. 0 is the lowest you can score, 10 is the highest you can score. And what they determined was that 4 is the tipping point. So anybody with 4 or more of these adverse childhood experiences is more likely to suffer from mental illness, is more likely to not complete high school, more likely to not be employed, more likely to experiment with hard drugs, more likely to be incarcerated, more likely to be a teen mom if it was a female, more likely to develop diabetes, more likely to have cancer, more likely to have cardiac disease, more likely to die young, right? So it's not just like bad choices. Like this is life and death stuff. This isn't like just, I don't know how to behave. This is like life and death types of things. And so I took the Adverse Childhood Experience Survey, and I'm a 9. Statistically, I should not be standing here, right? I have a 9 on my bathroom mirror. I have a 9 in my car. I have a 9 in my wallet, my purse. I have a 22-year-old son and a 20-year-old son. Every time we knock heads, which is more often than I'd like to think, and that I think I'm screwing it up, I remind myself I shouldn't be standing here. I have a tough day at work. I remind myself I'm a 9, right? It's okay. What I was interested in was how could someone like me, when I was here at Lakeland doing this work on student success, how could someone like me that was a 9 successfully navigate it? How did I get out? How did I end up earning my degree? How do I not live in poverty? Like, what was it? And so the research will tell us that if you want to break the cycle of poverty, and I remember when this research came out, this was like a big deal, right? They realized, like, here's the key to breaking generational poverty. You have to live 20 years without something bad happening to you. 20 years. I don't know that I've stretched 20 months together without something bad happening to me. But 20 years, and that will break generational poverty. My mother is the hardest working woman I've ever met. Sorry. She worked 2 jobs. She gave up everything to try to give us an opportunity. She finally got on her feet. We were homeless when I was a junior in high school. She finally got herself on her feet. And I got cancer, and she had to move back in with her parents to help take care of me while I was going through chemotherapy. Friday will be 33 years since I've been better. And then when I got better, she got back out on her feet, and she was still working 2 jobs to make ends meet. And then she finally could get down to 1 job. And I kid you not, she gets down to 1 job, and she's at a family birthday party and gets bitten by a dog. And when she gets bitten by the dog, she gets this horrible infection in her hand. They give her this really strong antibiotic, which knocks out all the bacteria in her system, and she gets C. diff and she gets MRSA. And my mom spent like 10 years fighting this illness. It impacted her ability to work. She ended up, after she finally bought a home, losing her home again, right? It wasn't because she didn't know how to pull herself up by her bootstraps. It wasn't because she wasn't willing to work hard. She did everything right, and the universe just kept swinging, right? That happens to some people. So this idea that 20 years, nothing happens, that's going to get you out of poverty, okay, but that's ridiculous. So I like to focus on what there is some control over. So I shared with you that I was a 9. And what we know about people that grow up like me, what we know about people that come from toxic ongoing stress, is that physiologically our brains develop differently. So the part of my brain, the prefrontal cortex, the part that is the executive control that tells me to like keep my filter, to stand in line, not to touch people, to behave, right? That part's underdeveloped. The part of my brain that's the fight or flight, the emotional response, that's way overdeveloped. So, you know, these little guys and girls show up to kindergarten and they can't sit still and they can't stand in line and they won't be on their carpet square and they're constantly touching people and they take things that don't belong to them. That's not because mom and dad aren't modeling good behavior at home. Physiologically, their brain is not the same as the kids sitting next to them, right? Just physiologically not the same. That doesn't mean that that gives anybody a pass. I had the same thing. I still struggle with the same thing sometimes. But what the research tells us is that there is something that makes a difference. When I worked here under Student Success, one of the things that I was charged with was looking at some body of research around developmental math. because developmental math was like this gatekeeper. If people couldn't get themselves out of developmental math, the chance that they were going to graduate with an associate's degree was really low. So there was this gentleman who did this national piece of research, looked at community colleges across the country, and what he was looking at specifically were people that were starting at the lowest levels of developmental math that graduated on time and went on to complete a bachelor's degree, right? The unicorns. How are they doing it? And so it was like, is it because they're getting a late start, or do they have additional wraparound services? Are they taking their math class 5 days a week versus 3 days a week? Is it because they get to have it in the afternoon versus the morning? Are they co-taught? Are they earning college credit with developmental credit? All of these things. And you know what? Wasn't any of it. Everybody they talked to could name a person. Every one of them named a faculty member, a tutor, somebody they had a relationship with. So it wasn't about the program, it wasn't about how it was delivered. What we know about brain research is the thing that makes a difference for somebody who has an underdeveloped executive function and overdeveloped fight or flight. What helps get people back on track is a positive relationship with another adult. It's people, period. That's it. So I love to be able to get in front of groups to talk about this, because the fact of the matter is, every single person in this room has the ability to change the trajectory of somebody else's life just by being nice. And I know that feels really oversimplified, but the research shows it over and over and over again. And all I can tell you is, for me, it's not that I went to Harvey, it's not that I went to Allegheny, it's not any program I was in. I can name for you every single teacher who made me feel like school was a safe place. I can name to you every single coach who made sure that I went into the next best spot. I can tell you every professional mentor who helped me with my imposter syndrome. They say, Deanne, you're smart enough, you're good enough, you belong here. So when we talk about poverty and all of the terrible things, I absolutely believe that we have to strive to make sure that everybody's basic needs are met, but it's far more complicated than that. And if we want to make sure that people coming from poverty feel empowered, are able to access the resources, and are able to take full advantage of what's available to them so they can get on the path, we need to make sure that we treat people with dignity, respect, and kindness, period. And that's all rooted in empathy. But in a nuts and bolts way, you all need to know what 211 is. So I have those little magnets up here for you. But if you ever felt like it's overwhelming and the problem's too big and there's nothing you can do, just be nice to somebody. That's it. Any questions? Nobody was screwed up. Any questions? My TED Talk. You're welcome. So again, 211 is the service provided by Lifeline. It is your one-stop shop for everything. So certainly, if you have any questions ever on behalf of students.
I typed 211 into my browser. It said, can I use your location? There it is.
And the reason it asks if it can use your location, so 211 is across the entire country. So this is good for you. So like if you're in Tennessee, for example, visiting family, and you're like, oh gosh, I wish 211 was down here. It is. And it's going to ping off of whatever your closest cell tower is. So if you're anywhere and need help, or if you have family members somewhere else that you think would benefit from 211, there's a 211 in their community. We are, unfortunately, one of only 3 states in the union that does not receive state funding for 211. So 211 is exclusively locally funded, which is why United Way makes sure to invest in them. We keep, I said this wasn't a policy thing, but we do keep trying to advocate for state funding to help support the 211 network. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Money. I mean, so Project Hope and Forbes, I'm always going to tell you with everybody, and I don't mean to sound crass, but when we talk about time, talent, treasure, money certainly, because then they can use it the way that they need it. But both for Forbes House and for Project Hope, it's all of the taxable goods as well, right? So, and I forgot to show you. So I always say it's not a silver bullet, it's a silver buckshot. So all of the agencies in Lake County that are addressing poverty in various ways. So you have Lifeline, you have Project Hope, the Salvation Army. Salvation Army is going to provide rental assistance, security deposits, helps people with the day shelter, provides a hot meal every single day, the one in Paynesville. There's also Salvation Armies across the county that are also helping with emergency needs. You have End 68 Hours of Hunger, which I know Lakeland has always partnered strongly with to help them with packing. But people like Forbes House and Project Hope that do emergency shelter, paper towels, cleaning products, quart-size bags, all those kinds of things. Because the challenge is, the reason the seniors are housed separately, the seniors stay the entire day, so they don't have to leave. Everybody else who goes to Project Hope, they check in the evening, they get dinner, they stay overnight, they can get a shower in the morning, or they can go over to Salvation Army and take their shower, but by 7 a.m. they have to be out. So there is no shelter for them at Project Hope, which is why most end up congregating at the Salvation Army in Paynesville, because that's the day shelter for our homeless population. But there's also a significant number of folks that choose to be homeless because whether it's a mental health issue or they don't want to be in shelter. So we do know that there's folks that choose not to be in shelter or they don't have access to the shelter. And then something that was interesting today in the strategic planning session, one of the qualifiers when we were setting the goal was to be able to provide services to folks without a home. And I said, well, isn't that just understood that if you're coming to the homeless shelter, you're without a home? And they were sharing with me some examples of where there have been people that have come to Project Hope that have apartments that come there because they're lonely. I mean, imagine. So when we talk about this challenge as it relates to poverty, it's just so much bigger than whether or not people have food and a roof over their head, which I know is where we want to start with the lowest bar. But it's about making sure that people feel valued and a part of the community and are able to have hope. Any other questions? Certainly, anytime you guys have questions about any of this stuff, if you want any of these agencies to come and present, I assure you they all love an opportunity to address a group about the great work that they do. And again, if there's any of the resources, I've listed the things that I cited in here, but Denise has the PowerPoint. However you want to share that, please do.